Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar for the Measure AA Grant Round number 3. My name is Jessica Davenport, and my colleague Linda Tong and I will be sharing some information about this grant program. You can type questions in at any time. So what is the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority? It was a regional agency created to fund shoreline projects that will protect, restore, and enhance San Francisco Bay. And it's funded through Measure AA, which is a $12 per year parcel tax that will generate $500 million over 20 years for restoration around San Francisco Bay. It passed with 70% support in the 9-county Bay Area. Complete restoration is estimated to cost over $2 billion, so Measure AA funds will leverage state and federal funds. And the jurisdiction of the authority is the 9-county Bay Area, excluding the Delta Primary Zone. Our current round 3 opened on September 18th, and applications will be due December 13th. We encourage people to do a pre-application consultation, and you can set that up by emailing us at grants@sfbrarestore.org, and we will set up a half-hour phone call with you for a consultation. As you know, today is a webinar, and we will be awarding, our board will be bringing projects to our board for consideration for awarding in May of next year. So the funding available this year is up to around $12 million, and you can get more information on our website. So under the Restoration Authority Act, there's specific things that the authority can fund. So specifically, it's habitat projects that will restore, protect, or enhance tidal wetlands, managed ponds, or natural habitats along the shoreline, flood management features that are part of such a habitat project, and public access or recreational amenities that are part of such a habitat project. So sometimes the question comes up, what do you mean by along the shoreline? So we have clarified that in our grant guidelines, and we've explained that it includes subtidal habitats, which are lying below mean low tide within a reasonable distance of the shoreline, baylands, which are well defined in the Baylands Ecosystem Habitat Goals report and described here, and also transition zones. So that's uplands that are adjacent to potential or actual tidal wetlands that provide transitional habitat, and also areas that will be future marshes through sea level rise, in other words, the marsh migration space. And those would enable the project to be resilient to sea level rise.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. Now we're going to talk about some of Measure A's eligibility criteria. So our grant requirements are based on SFBRA's enabling legislation, which is the Restoration Authority Act that we just described, and on Measure AA. So all proposals have to protect, restore, or enhance habitat and meet at least one of Measure AA's 4 main programs. The first Measure AA program is the Safe, Clean Water and Pollution Prevention Program. Some specific activities that are eligible include reducing pollution and engaging in restoration activities, shoreline cleanup and trash removal, and restoring wetlands and creeks. Again, projects would need to meet the Restoration Authority Act and Measure AA eligibility. For example, a shoreline cleanup proposal would also need to make the case that it will protect, enhance, or restore habitat. The second Measure AA program is the Fish, Bird, and Wildlife Habitat Program. Some specific activities that are eligible include protecting or restoring wetlands and other shoreline habitats to benefit shorebirds, waterfowl, and fish, enhancing public lands for expanded habitat, and providing for stewardship, maintenance, and monitoring of restoration projects. The third Measure AA program is the Natural Flood Protection Program. Activities that are eligible include providing nature-based flood protection through wetland and habitat restoration, and building or improving flood protection levees that are a necessary part of wetland restoration activities. And the fourth Measure AA program is the Shoreline Public Access Program. Activities that are eligible include constructing and managing public access trails and related facilities, and providing interpretive materials and outreach events to protect the bay's health and encourage community engagement.
Thanks, Linda. So the other thing to keep in mind for Measure A proposals is that our grant scoring and evaluation is based on how well the project achieves the programs and activities of Measure AA, but also how well it achieves the Measure AA or addresses the Measure AA priorities and also its likelihood of success. So you can see we have several prioritization criteria. So any projects that address these issues will be prioritized for funding. And basically, these are explained in more detail in our grant guidelines. So for example, if you look at a something like greatest long-term impact, you'll see that has to do with how well will this project survive over time, including its resilience to sea level rise. And geographic distribution, we're going to talk a little bit more about later, as well as benefiting economically disadvantaged communities. We're providing some guidance on how that can be done in a meaningful way. And the other criteria as well are described in more detail in our grant guidelines, and we're happy to talk more about those. So the project's likelihood of success will be evaluated by looking at several aspects of the application. The reviewers will be looking for a complete, reasonable, well-thought-out scope of work, budget, and schedule. They will also be looking at the project's likelihood of maintenance over time, and that would be judged on whether the project benefits from community support and involvement, and also how it measures success. And if it's a planning project, how likely is it to actually be constructed? We'll also look at the grantee's likelihood of success in terms of the applicant's history of implementing projects in the past and having the needed resources to succeed in implementing the proposed project.
Eligible grantees for our grant program include federal, state, and local agencies, tribal governments, nonprofit orgs, and owners or operators of shoreline parcels. And eligible locations include, again, the shoreline areas of the 9 counties in the San Francisco Bay Area, excluding the Delta Primary Zone. For more specifics, such as if you want to look at a map of where the Delta Primary Zone is, you can check our full grant guidelines and request for proposals documents, and those are all on our website under the Grants tab. There are a lot of different types of project phases that are eligible for our funding, including acquisition of properties, planning and design stages of a project, permitting, construction or implementation, monitoring, and maintenance. Regardless of what phase the project is in, we highly encourage you to start thinking about how to engage the surrounding communities for a more robust project. Think about what local organizations you can partner with to combine a strong habitat restoration proposal with strong community engagement, especially economically disadvantaged communities. A tip sheet on meaningful community engagement from the State Coastal Conservancy is linked here, and we'll make these slides available so you can click on the link. And it's also linked in our application materials. Geographic distribution of funds. 50% of our funds have a geographic distribution requirement, and that has to be achieved over the 20 years of Measure AA. So, for example, projects in the North Bay get 9% of Measure AA funds, and projects in the East Bay get 18%, and so on, over the 20 years that Measure AA is generating funds. The other 50% of the funds is bay-wide and can go to any of the 9 counties. So the geographic distribution requirement isn't for each round of the grant program. It's, again, over the 20 years of Measure AA.
So we have a few examples of projects that the authority has funded. The two on this slide are very different in that the South Bay Shoreline project is a large construction grant, whereas Tuscornia Marsh is a smaller planning grant comparatively, but they both include habitat restoration, flood protection, public access, and provide benefits to economically disadvantaged communities. A couple other examples show the range of projects that the authority funds. So the Restoring Wetland Upland Transition Zone with STRAW, which is students and teachers restoring a watershed, will engage over 5,000 participants in restoring the shoreline over 5 years. So that one was scoring very high in youth involvement and volunteer participation. The San Leandro Treatment Wetland Project is a demonstration project on how to enhance an area that will both improve habitat conditions and also filter nitrogen waste from that wastewater treatment plant.
We want to give you a few tips on applying for our grant program. The first one is, of course, to be sure to review Measure AA's eligibility criteria and priority criteria. We'll make these slides available so you can refer back to them, but also look at the language, the specific language in our grant guidelines, request for proposals, and application for more details. That can all be found on our website, sfbayrestore.org. Each proposal will be evaluated based on the eligibility criteria, which are the 4 main programs of Measure AA that we covered, the priority criteria, and the project and applicant's likelihood of success. And remember that likelihood of success includes how much community support a project has, how the community would actually benefit from the project, and to what extent the community is involved in the project. So just a project being adjacent to a community or an economically disadvantaged community you'll need to explain a little bit more of how that community actually benefits rather than just being near a project. Again, phone consultations with us before you apply are highly encouraged so that we can get a sense of what your project idea is, and we can let you know if it could be a good fit for our grant program. And go to our website to access the application packet. There are 3 parts to the application packet. The first one is a PDF cover sheet. The second is a Word document with the application questions. And within that Word document, there is a grant application checklist on the last page, which tells you to include other files such as maps and photos. And the last part is an Excel budget template. So once all parts of the application are complete, you can submit the files by email to grants@sfbarestore.org, and any questions or issues should also be directed towards that email. And here are some frequently asked questions that we get. Our grants webpage also has an FAQ document with more of these questions and answers. But here are just a few of the topics that we're often asked about. There is no minimum or maximum grant award, and the authority can fund pilot projects. Having matching funds isn't mandatory, but it would help your application if there was matching funds. Projects that cover multiple programs and activities are compelling, but we'll also be looking at how well the projects meet the programs and activities. So it's not necessary to hit all the points of the program as long as you are meeting the points well. And again, the geographic distribution of funds requirement is over the life of the 20-year grant program, not for each grant round. And that's all. Thank you, and we can take any questions. You can type your questions into the sidebar on your GoToWebinar, and we'll see them as they come in. And let's see. Well, we did have one question come in a little early through email, so.
Oh, here's one. Okay. Let's see.
Yeah, let's see.
I'm going to make it bigger.
Yeah. Let's see. Or do you want to?
Okay. So the question we received via email was about the guidance on the beneficial use of dredged material. So the grant guidelines have been amended to provide more clarity on projects that would like to use this grant program to cover the incremental cost of bringing dredged material to a restoration site. And they've been clarified to state that the focus of the application should describe the benefits to the restoration site. There should be a specific one mentioned in the application rather than simply discussing the idea that if funded, this dredging project would seek a restoration site. There should be a specific one identified that would be receiving the dredged material. And also, the project can fund dredging that is part of the design of a restoration project. And also, there's more guidance to state that the dredging itself, if it is done according to a design that is intended to be self-sustaining through natural processes over time so that dredging occurs less frequently, that can also be factored in as a benefit of the project. But the primary focus is on the dredge material getting to the restoration site, and we felt that that would be helpful to applicants if they had that guidance to understand that they should be explaining the benefits of their project in that way.
Right. And there was another one. The second question was, could you please confirm that the City of Dublin in Alameda County would not be eligible for these funds as they're located inland and not adjacent to any tidally influenced water bodies?
Well, it's the location. As a grantee, a city could be a grantee, but it has to be a location, and I don't think the city has those locations. So, yeah, from what we can tell in this question, that is the case.
And one question that's come in.
Can we open this up bigger? We're having a little trouble having our questions readable. Oh, there we go. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
So we just answered the first question about beneficial dredge material. And there's a question of how do we track the total allotment per regional area. And that is done through our performance measures. We track this information and report out annually in our annual report. And that gives the public and our board and anyone else who's interested an update on where we are with the percentages. Okay, so the next question, if a project is funded but encounters a design change after funding, but relative goals are, relative goals are still met, how is that addressed administratively by the program? Must you submit a change of project description, or can you request additional funds if needed in a subsequent grant round? So the way the grant program works is the applications are reviewed by a combination of our advisory committee reviewers and staff and brought to the board for authorization. So there is a specific project authorized by the board, and that description goes into the grant agreement. So as long as the project changes are still within what the board authorized and what the grant agreement authorized, there can be some minor changes. There are also examples of where projects can be funded initially for a certain phase, and then they may need to complete CEQA first before they are able to get board authorization for a subsequent phase. So that's an example of adding, the applicant can request funds again and go back to the board to request an additional authorization in a subsequent grant round. Okay, example of a pilot project. Well, the project that was mentioned earlier, the San Leandro treatment wetland, is an example of a pilot project that's dealing with reducing nitrogen from the sewage treatment plant.
Yeah. Also, all of our currently funded projects can be found on our website, so you can find a brief description of that and also the staff recommendation that was brought to our governing board.
Yeah, and the Tuscornia Marsh project is also a pilot project in certain ways because it's looking at doing some innovative ways of restoring the marsh and protecting it from wave action in that area.
Okay, cool. All right, the next question is, what level of expertise is required for project approval? For example, if a nonprofit applies for a grant to lead a group of volunteers to be guided in removing invasive non-native plants and planting native plants, is that adequate expertise?
I think that would depend. If the nonprofit has experience doing that, that would be adequate expertise. I think a lot of it has to do with the specifics of the project, and that's why we encourage you to have a consultation with us.
Can Measure AA funds be used to
underground, put utilities underground as part of a project? Again, I think that's a case by case. Basically, we're looking for projects that will achieve the fundamental purposes of the grant program, and depending, I know that can be extremely expensive to underground utilities. It's not really a yes or no answer. It would be a case by case. So can a project be only maintenance?
And monitoring here.
Oh, and monitoring. Okay. So yes, that is an eligible project phase, is both maintenance and monitoring. It can be hard to compete with the other project phases like construction or planning, but it's definitely eligible. So how many grant cycles are there? What is the timing? They are annual. So the next one would be next fall, after this one is complete in December.
Yeah. And we're expecting like 20 rounds total for the 20 years of Measure AA. So this is the third round, so there'll be quite a few more to come.
Okay. James writes, I would like to apply for a Measure AA grant for construction, but we are still in the planning phase and have not yet completed designs and CEQA. Would it be inappropriate to apply for construction funds at this point? The way it works when you are planning to do CEQA is that you do need to complete CEQA before a project can be brought to the board for authorization. However, if you're doing the planning phase and you have a good idea about your construction timing and how you would fund it and things like that, I think it is worthwhile to discuss that in your application, because part of the likelihood of success of a planning project is how likely is it to be implemented. But we can also discuss that more on a case-by-case basis.
But it seems like at this point, if you are still in planning phase, you wouldn't be applying for construction funds. You could mention your timeline for construction, but you would be applying for planning funds
and CEQA.
Yeah, and CEQA.
Yeah, and we can fund CEQA. Okay, with regard to matching funds, do the funds need to be awarded directly to the organization applying, or can matching funds also include funds awarded for activities on the project site, even if two different organizations reference to an existing project site with many different partnering agencies. That sounds like something that should be explained in the application. For a specific project, matching funds are really the funds that are matching for that project. It's definitely worth mentioning if there are a lot of related activities that would help that project be successful, or if that project is building on activities and complementary to those activities to make it more successful. But if there are different activities for a different project, I don't think you could consider that to be matching funds. So can a project receive AA funds before completing the CEQA process, i.e. a planning grant? Yes. How about permits that can't be issued until CEQA is complete? No. We basically divide the funding authorizations to pre-CEQA and post-CEQA. So anything that goes up through CEQA would be funded in the first phase as planning, and then post-CEQA to do final design, permitting, construction that could be funded as a later phase with a later application. So is there a list of prior approved projects and how were they graded? So there is a list of Restoration Authority eligible projects in EcoAtlas. And the list was initially developed during the Measure AA campaign. Groups were asked to submit their projects. And then in the last couple of years, they have been moved from the authority's website into EcoAtlas. And so they are assessed for whether they are eligible. But a lot of them are in the conceptual stage. So to really determine eligibility for funding, that would happen at the time that one of those projects applied for a grant. So I wouldn't say they're actually approved projects. They are eligible, at least conceptually.
And projects that have actually been funded are all listed on our website, and you can check that out. And how they were graded, the main scoring criteria were the same. So based on how well they met the eligibility criteria of Measure AA, how well they met the prioritization criteria, and then also likelihood of success of the project and applicant.
Oh, someone asked for our names. So my name is Jessica Davenport. I'm the Deputy Program Manager at the State Coastal Conservancy, which provides staffing to the Restoration Authority.
And my name is Linda Tong, and I am a Project Manager with the San Francisco Bay Restoration Authority and the State Coastal Conservancy.
The next question, does a project watershed have to be on the bay's shoreline? The proposed watershed is in an eligible county, but it is in the southern part of Santa Clara County. So according to the Restoration Authority Act, the projects have to be along the shoreline of San Francisco Bay. So that does not sound like it would be eligible. So next question. You want to do next?
Okay. Next question is, would you fund an educational program that was tied to a restoration project? For example, participants learn about issues facing the shoreline before engaging in cleanups or restoration projects. I think as long as the project is tied to a site along the shoreline in an eligible location, that sounds like something we would be very interested in funding because it has that community engagement component to it that would make it a stronger application.
To build on the questions regarding San Francisco Bay, are projects in such areas as Richardson Bay and Alameda Channel considered part of SF Bay? Yes. That was an easy one.
Okay. I think that's
Looks like that's all the
questions we have. So, yeah. If there are no more questions, we'll wrap up this webinar. And again, we can send out the slides to you all afterward, and we can also post them on the website.
Yeah, so thank you so much for participating in the webinar, and we're happy to have follow-up conversations if you have additional questions. So thanks.
Great, thanks. Oh, where can we get the PowerPoint? We'll be posting that, and we can also send it out to you all. Okay.